So the best way I can describe this story is as if Grey's Anatomy did a movie with Amber Heard playing a male antagonist. Yeah, the story is mad. Researching this felt like I was a proper investigative journalist or something, because most articles that I found on this story, they always tell like either one or two parts of the story, but I feel like there's 3 or even 4 parts of this story, and there was kind of none of it that I felt that I could leave out. So instead of writing something that's around 5,000 words, we're now at 11,700. Still can't do numbers. 11,765 words. So you watching this know how long this video is going to be, and I, filming this, am slightly terrified of how long this is going to take me. But I can't wait to get into this because honestly, I found it so fascinating. Also, if like me, you've been watching Emily D. Baker for about 6 weeks a while ago, keep watching, because I found an interview about today's situation, which reminded me so much of Amber Heard's NBC interview and her trial testimony. And I have thoughts about it. Anyways, hi! Thank you so much for clicking on my face today. And if you're new here, welcome in general. My name is Eureka, and I tell stories, mainly weekly solved true crime cases, but also about other shenanigans that my brain comes up with or needs to rant or vent about. I kind of have been neglecting that part lately, and that's mainly because I have all these ideas, but doing weekly true crime videos is pretty intense. So, but yes, maintaining continuity. I know I'm a bit late with this one, but it cost me a lot of work, but it was super exciting. So, blah, blah, blah. If all of that just made you go, well, I'll hold my beer whilst I subscribe to that, thank you. That would be so nice. It would be an honor to tell you the stories, and especially today's story. And I'm rambling. So yeah, let's do some sort of time efficiency thing, and I'll do the disclaimer whilst you hit the subscribe button. This video is for educational and storytelling purposes only. Never do I mean any harm to the people I talk about or any disrespect, so please be nice to each other as well in the comments. And also, this video may contain graphic descriptions of things that people may find triggering, and as such, viewer discretion is advised. Alright, now let's get into today's story. What was that? Oh, let's just do it. Alright, so there's quite a lot of people that we need to talk about today. So we're going to start it off by telling the story of a man named Paolo Macchiarini. Paolo was born on the 22nd of August in 1958 in Basel, which is Switzerland. Correct, very good. But he was born to Italian parents, so Italian parents, but born in Switzerland. When growing up, Paolo seemed very intelligent and very eager to learn new things, and people would find him a very fun and charismatic teenager, who indeed did grow up to be very smart, because he started studying at the University of Pisa in Italy. There at the University of Pisa, he earned his medical degree in 1986. And also, that same year, he would marry the love of his life, a woman named Emanuela Pecchia, and together they would have 2 beautiful children, a son and a daughter. But Paolo continued to study at the University of Pisa, where he would earn his Masters of Surgical degree, if I pronounce that correctly, but he would pass with flying colours, and after that he was hired as an assistant professor at that same university. Continuing his career by studying even more, Paolo completed a course in statistics in clinical research, and then in 1984, he got a master's and a doctorate degree in organ and tissue transplantation. Then he also specialized in thoracic surgery, because why not? And here I am having problems uploading 1 video a week. So yeah, after also getting a degree in thoracic surgery, Paolo wanted to continue being a surgical professor, but also continue his research in the meantime. And so in 2000, he took on a job as a professor in Paris Sud, where he would be able to do this, to be a practicing doctor and also study as a medical scientific researcher. Then in 2005, he moved to Spain, where he became a full professor in Barcelona, sort of same thing, copy-paste. And aside from all of this, He also spoke 7 languages, so yeah, I think I've painted quite a good picture of, who Paolo Macchiarini is. Now, his primary area of study was regenerative medicine, and specifically stem cell research and transplant research. Now, to explain it a little bit, and obviously I'm not a doctor or anything, but I did, research. So stem cells, right? They are cells that are your own, that are coded to you, and they could sort of virtually become any cell in the body, which means that inside the bone marrow, they can become red or white blood cells or platelets. And outside the bone marrow, they could become heart muscle cells or liver or kidney cells, any type of cell really. And this research was kind of opening the doors for the medical world to the idea of custom-made organ transplants. That would be amazing and would save thousands and thousands of lives. Well, probably millions. What am I saying? Thousands. That would save so many lives. Now, next to stem cell research, Paolo was really focused on the seemingly unsolvable problem of trachea transplants. And your trachea is your windpipe, which is the tube here that you breathe through. And if you have only one lung, you would still be able to live quite a healthy and active life because it's an organ that we have 2 of. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. But for the trachea, that's actually not the case because you have 1 of it, and if you remove it or if it collapses, if there's something wrong with it, you die. So trachea problems, not good. A trachea transplant is also very hard because it's very difficult to get blood cells and vessels growing onto the transplant, the donor transplant, because usually would reject the donor organ. The body would be like, nah, what's that? We don't want that. And the body would attack it and it would die. So trachea transplants, very hard. Now in 2005, a 27-year-old Colombian woman who was living in Barcelona in Spain, she came to the hospital there with constricted airways. She was suffering from an infection, and Paolo came to see her at the hospital clinic, and what he proposed to do was a surgery where he would basically remove the bad bit of trachea and then sort of sew the healthy ends back together. And for the medical or science nerds amongst us here, this is called a resection. Damn it, I was going to do it out of my head, but resection with primary end-to-end anastomosis. I really love how much interesting things I learn by doing this YouTube thing. Like, the information on different subjects that I have found is insane, and I finally feel smart again for the first time in my life, which is really something. But yeah, Paolo would continue to do this surgery on her, but she would go on to have complications. And it turned out that now her left lung was on the verge of collapsing. And so Paolo came forward with a proposal, because at this hospital he had a research team and laboratory where he was researching a new and groundbreaking transplant technique. They would take the donor transplant, strip away all of the stem cells from the donor person, and then seed Claudia's cells, or the patient's cells, onto the donor transplant. And so this would mean that the stem cells would then sort of grow the donor trachea into something that the receiving person's body wouldn't reject. Now, the risky thing here was that it had never been done before, so people didn't know if it was going to work or what to expect. And of course, that didn't go unnoticed, because now he was getting offers from many prestigious institutes, hospital, clinical research laboratories. A hospital in Italy offered him not only a full professorship, but also a state-of-the-art laboratory where he could do his clinical research with a team of doctors who would want to work for him. Now, really, this kind of feels like what Meredith Grey is going through right now, with a whole new state-of-the-art laboratory for scientific breakthrough research, and then something with a transplant doctor as well. But I promised myself I wouldn't go down the Grey's Anatomy road, so we were going to try not to do that. But yeah, he got all of these offers, but the one he would take in 2011 was the one at the Karolinska Institutet in Sweden, which is the Karolinska Institute and Hospital in Stockholm, which is the capital of Sweden. very good. Okay. And now to give you a bit of an idea of how acclaimed this place was, the professors there were the people that selected the Nobel Prize nominees and winners in the category of physiology and medicine. So yeah, Karolinska Institute, big deal. And now in the laboratories there, in collaboration with a team of medical scientists at the University College of London, Paolo would develop a revolutionary idea. Instead of the donor trachea, he developed an artificial trachea. He would line that with the stem cells of the patient, and then the blood vessels would still start to grow and would turn this thing into actually the person's windpipe so that the body wouldn't reject it anymore. I hope you're still with me. I'm trying my best. And now the first person to receive this artificial trachea transplant was an Eritrean man called Andemariam Teklesemblet-Beyen, I really hope I pronounced that right, who was a doctoral student at the University of Iceland, and he suffered from cancer. He had undergone chemotherapy and radiation, but his doctors were preparing for palliative care, which is basically when you reach the end of life situation. But they thought it couldn't hurt to reach out to big Paolo Macchiarini. And Paolo agreed to do the surgery. And so Andemariam was hospitalized at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, where Paolo would perform the first ever artificial trachea transplant surgery on him. Now, this was groundbreaking as shit, because if this worked, that would once again open the doors even further, to the idea of artificial organs custom made for a person. Obviously, once again, the media widely covered it, and an article was published on the front page of the New York Times. And this caught the eye of a producer at NBC Studios in America. When the producer read the article, she was like, we need to do an episode of Dateline about him. And if you have been watching true crime for a longer time, you probably know what Dateline is, because it's a true crime sort of documentary series. Not only true crime, but it's always a fascinating subject and it's very enticing. And so in 2013, they came down and started interviewing Paolo. The documentary would mostly center around a Korean toddler who was 2 years old, who was a little girl named Hannah Warren, and she was born without a trachea. And the doctors had given up on her, but also once again thought it couldn't hurt to reach out to the big Paolo Macchiarini. And so Paolo consulted and decided that he would do it. And she was only 2 years old, so she would be the youngest person to ever receive a trachea transplant in the first place, let alone an artificial one. And all of this resulted in a 2-hour-long episode on NBC's Dateline titled A Leap of Faith. And the release of this documentary would absolutely set off Paolo's career, boost him into Super Saiyan mode. He was just the guy to be watching when it came to medical renovations and breakthroughs. Now, let's switch a little bit and talk about the producer of the documentary that NBC did on him. This was a woman named Benita Alexander. Benita was a journalist and a producer. She'd also won awards as an investigative journalist for NBC News. So Benita was also a person that in her field of work was just up there. Benita was born in Michigan on the 21st of April in 1966. And she would be married and have a lovely daughter called Jacina. But unfortunately, the marriage didn't work out. And so in 2009, Benita and her daughter Jacina moved to New York. Now, all of her friends said that she was a very just loyal and mainly non-judgmental person, which I really value in a person, with an incredible work ethic and drive. She would work a gazillion hours and really dig into the news items she was working on, always showing up looking fashionably presentable and done up. And despite all of her work hours, she would make sure that she would have time for the people that she loved most, especially her daughter and a couple of her friends. So Benita really knew how to find the balance between her work and her private life. Now, whilst filming this documentary with Paolo, Benita unfortunately would get some really devastating news, which was that her ex-husband, whom she was not living with anymore, had been diagnosed with a malignant glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive type of brain cancer. And unfortunately, it was terminal, and doctors said that he definitely wasn't going to make it. And so this was really hard on Benita, and at some point he would slip into a coma, and Benita would realize that she wasn't going to be able to say goodbye to him anymore. And obviously that's a very hard thing to be able to process, that all of a sudden you can't say goodbye to someone anymore. And seeing how hard it was on her daughter was really hard on Benita as well. So she was focusing on this documentary, but in the meantime, she was having a really hard time. From the moment that they had met, Paolo and Benita had this sort of click between them, this fireworky magical spark. But obviously Benita was going through a lot at the time, and also she really didn't want to compromise the integrity of the documentary she was making about him. Benita didn't do anything with it, and he turned into a good friend of hers who would actually also give her some solid medical advice. He would give her a hug whenever she was feeling really down. And when Benita's ex-husband did pass away, Paolo would take her on the back of his motorcycle towards a river where Benita would be able to stand on the bridge and throw in some of her ex-husband's favourite flowers. And Paolo gives her a moment, so she's able to do this, and she starts just crying. She breaks down. And Paolo, he walks over to her and he gives her a big, strong, long hug. And Benita, behind his back, is going, "Damn, I'm falling for this guy." Now, by then, Paolo had actually been separated from his wife for over 2 years, but because Paolo was such a busy man, they hadn't finalized the papers yet, and both of them were kind of like ignoring it, like it doesn't exist. And so he still needed to finalize the divorce, but Paolo was a bachelor, a suitor, free to go. And so the two finally give in, and a fairy tale romance would ensue. Paolo would take her on a trip to Venice where he would spend money on her. He would take her on yachts. He would take her on expensive dinners, expensive wines, give her the most insane expensive gifts. And this was actually the first of many trips he would take her on, because he would take her to London, to Mexico, to Puerto Rico, to Russia, to the Bahamas twice, to Greece. And it was just mad. But besides that, she loved everything that Paolo would arrange and buy for her. Just like last week's episode, she wasn't a material girl, and she felt absolutely for Paolo how he was to her, how much he loved her, and the messages that he would send her. Because he would often make it known how much he loved her by writing with lipstick on her mirror, which... don't do that, I have to clean that. But he would leave her love notes on the mirror, and he would write her other letters, or make a lot of selfie videos where he also professed his love for her.
Just wanted to send you a few loving good morning words and a lot of kisses to my princess. I cannot stop thinking at you, and especially proud that you are mine. I love you so very much.
Ah, so cute. Now, one thing Benita really loved to do was to dance, and that was actually the one thing, I mean, there had to be one thing, that Paolo was lacking, because he couldn't really dance. He didn't know how to salsa dance. And this was something that made Benita a little sad, but then again, what is there to be sad about when you're dating this amazing guy? And at some point, he takes her to Mexico, and whilst they're there at a bar, all of a sudden, loud salsa music starts playing. He takes her hand, he twirls her around, because it turns out that Paolo, especially for Benita, had been taking private salsa lessons whilst he had been working in Russia to surprise her with his dance moves. And now Benita's friends, who had been wanting to be there for her, but she had been away because of filming this documentary, they saw a completely different person from the months before. She had a sparkle in her eye again, and she was absolutely just glowing with happiness. And Benita felt it too. She was the happiest she'd ever been. And so after giving it quite a lot of thought, she decided that it was time to introduce her daughter to him. And this went absolutely great. better than she could have imagined. Paolo immediately clicked with her and he sort of took her on as his stepdaughter, and obviously Paolo being Paolo, he treated her like an absolute princess. And now in his turn, Paolo was also absolutely smitten with Benita, and so in 2013, during the holiday season, Paolo proposes to Benita with I'm so sorry, with $100,000 ring. Aww. To me, though, like knowing whatever Paolo has done for her up until now, when you look at the proposal, because he videotaped it, it looks kind of underwhelming, but maybe that was his way of showing his love. And Benita was absolutely over the moon, and so they were engaged now, and they were absolutely excited about planning their new life together. Paolo was away a lot, but he would stay at her apartment whenever he was there, and he bought her a piano for her apartment, which was partially, you know, for her as a gift.
It was
also
really
so
good.
She
was just wowed by this guy who's so smart and so intellectual and still...
But still, Paolo had to be away a lot though, because obviously at this time he held positions in Sweden, in Russia, in Barcelona in Spain, and in London. And next to that, he also was part of a group of surgeons who sort of, like the highest surgeons in the world, who would cater to a certain group of like VIPs, which is basically just insanely white rich people, like celebrities and politicians kind of stuff. So Paolo, he was away a lot, but Benita, she thought it was hard, but she completely understood because she had done the documentary on him. She knew how important he was. And also, when Paolo came back, he would just really make it up to her. So even though it was kind of hard to schedule their lives, they were absolutely doing great. Now, considering the wedding, Paolo really wanted to treat his lady, and he said that he wanted to arrange everything and surprise her. He wanted her to just show up and be surprised, which to me a little bit sounds like, oh, don't you worry your pretty little face about that. You just sit there and look pretty. But, you know, he wanted to surprise her as a romantic gesture. But what she didn't want to do, obviously, was the wedding dresses. And so she and her friends got to shopping for wedding invitations, which were lambskin, but apparently that's like a thing. And then they go wedding dress shopping. And one of her cousins was actually her wedding dress designer. And because the wedding was going to be a 4-day ordeal, she was going to need 4 different gowns. And so she got herself 3 beautiful gowns. And then for the wedding dress itself, she had a very big poofy dress with the surprise that during their first dance, Paolo would twirl her around, rip off the skirt, and a shorter salsa sparkly piece would reveal itself for a massive salsa extravaganza surprise thing. You get me. And the wedding was going to be absolutely huge because Paolo had arranged for it to be at Castel Gandolfo, which is only 40 minutes outside of Rome in Italy, which was also the summer residence of the Pope. So just a little nice venue to get married at. Paolo really wanted a Catholic wedding, and Benita wasn't Catholic, and so she was worried that because of that, and because they were both divorced, that no one really approved of that, no priest would marry them. But Paolo said he was adamant, and at some point he was on a business trip to Rome, and he called her saying he had a little surprise for her. The Pope was actually one of his personal clients. This was very private, of course, and that he had told the Pope about their predicament with their Catholic wedding, and that the Pope had then offered to marry them himself. And Benita was like, nah, fuck off. That's not true, and this is not funny. She got mad and she hung up. But then she got to Googling and she was like, does the Pope marry people? It turns out he actually had married a bunch of people, even at the Vatican itself. So there could be a possibility that maybe he was marrying them at his summer residence in Italy. And so she phoned Paolo back and she was like, I don't believe you, but talk to me. And Paolo said that the Pope actually thought that the two of them were the perfect sort of poster couple for his progressive agenda, because he wanted to be more modern and less conservative with the Vatican. And so he wasn't only going to marry them, but he also wanted the two of them to be able to get communion, even though they weren't divorced. And he also wanted everyone who was at the wedding who was gay to be able to get communion as well, which was very important for Benita's cousin who made her dress, who actually identified as a Catholic as well. And this had been very, very important for him, being sort of rejected all his life. And so they thought this was amazing and they were really looking forward to it, even though everyone at first thought it was a complete joke, of course.
Oh my God! Wait, no, I'm not joking. We're getting married by the Pope.
Here's Papa.
From that moment on, I felt like my head was spinning and it didn't stop.
But they kept seeing Paolo show up every time. He took everyone with him on dinners and trips, and they saw how he was with her daughter, Jacina. And so Paolo just kept proving everything. And now the Pope wasn't the only sort of A-list person being there, because Paolo, being a super surgeon, knowing a lot of rich people all over the world, there would be a lot of A-list celebrities and politicians at the wedding. Now, let's just look at the guest list, right? Just a few names. Russell Crowe would be there. Andrea Bocelli, the very famous Italian opera singer, would sing at the church. Not only that, but also Elton John and John Legend would be performing. The Beckhams would be there. The Clintons would be there. The Obamas would be there. The then president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, would be there. And also President Putin of Russia would be there. So imagine you're her friends, right? Or even Benita herself, like, help? What do I wear? Especially with the Pope being there. Am I allowed some curves in the dress that I've already designed? No? Some cleavage? No, the titties are not. Okay, great. I'd be freaking the fuck out on the inside. And so feeling a bit overwhelmed by this, but also feeling some kind of responsibility, Benita would have her entire family and her friends sign a non-disclosure agreement, which basically means that you have to shut the fuck up about what happens at the wedding, I guess. Now, Paolo would take Benita on another weekend getaway to Italy, where he would show her around Castel Gandolfo, where they would be married, and she would be walking inside this big entrance, and there was a beautiful lake where there would be fireworks at night, and she was just absolutely excited about this. But during the trip, she noticed that Paolo seemed a bit off. And so Benita, she asked him about it, because obviously, as a grown-up, you talk about your feelings. And Paolo was honest with her, and he said, I am actually under a lot of stress because some of his colleagues who had worked with him on the trachea transplant were now accusing him of scientific misconduct. He said that this was normal when you invent a new procedure, that obviously you can expect complications and a lot of criticism from the outside world. But there was some other really sad news though that was keeping him busy, and that was that the 2-year-old Korean toddler, Hannah Warren, who Benita had been filming and Paolo had been operating on, she had actually died due to complications of her surgery. And so Benita was absolutely heartbroken because she had also been close up filming this little girl. And so they returned to the United States, where Benita immediately went full PR mode because she really wanted to help Paolo. And her friend would say that her entire table was covered in newspapers, articles, and things she was figuring out. And Paolo would tell her that it was okay because she didn't die from the procedure. She died because of underlying complications. So I'm going to be okay. And in the meantime, they were also still planning their future. And they had decided that they were all going to live together, Paolo, Benita, and Jacina, in a beautiful villa in Barcelona in Spain. And so on the 15th of May in 2015, Benita pulled her daughter out of private school. She quit her job, which was really hard for her because she loved working for NBC. But she knew this was the right thing and started preparing for their big move across the pond. And then a day after that, she is celebrating with a group of friends at a spa, getting some beauty treatments and, preparing for the wedding, celebrating her big move, when she gets an email from a colleague of hers from NBC. And the subject just said, we need to talk. And in this email, there was just an article, and she started reading it, and it was about a visit that the Pope would be making on the 11th of July in 2015, so in about a month. And you might be thinking, okay, so, well, the 11th of July 2015 was actually their wedding day, as in the day that the Pope would be in Italy marrying Benita and Paolo. But this article was now saying that the Pope would be in South America on that day. So, shit. And also, it was easy to figure out from this article that this visit had been planned a long time ago. So, absolutely furious and feeling sick to her stomach, Benita calls up Paolo and she's like, what the fuck? And well, here's what Paolo said. He said that the former Pope, Pope Benedict, was trying to undermine the current Pope, Pope Francis, and that he was trying to stop their wedding from happening, but that she needn't worry because the Pope was actually having none of it, and he was flying to the Vatican himself to fix this situation. However, Benita was not fooled anymore. She felt like her eyes had been opened, and realizing that she had not done anything for the wedding because he wanted to surprise her, she started making phone call after phone call to the venue, to the caterers, and every single one would have no idea of their wedding. They wouldn't even know who Paolo was, and nothing was arranged. Obviously, she was heartbroken because it had all been a lie, and she was also like, wait, if I hadn't just found out, how far would he have taken this? Because, mind you, just the day before, she had quit her job and pulled her daughter out of school to move to Barcelona with him, and everything was fake. But Paolo had made one very big mistake, and that was that he did this to the wrong woman. Because Benita was an award-winning investigative journalist, and so she was now on to him. And she did the thing that I was hoping that she would do when I was first reading this story. She started playing a cat and mouse game with him. So basically, she pretended with him like she had no idea, like everything was fine, whilst in the meantime hiring a PI in the US, a PI in Italy, and herself doing a lot of research as well. She wanted to have complete proof because obviously this man was capable of a lot of lies, and so before she got to him, she wanted to know every single detail. At the same time, Paolo's colleagues were actually still after him, and this had kind of caused a media frenzy. And so Benita said to Paolo that it would probably be better to postpone their wedding because she didn't want the most beautiful days of their lives to be sort of overshadowed by stress that he had and that she had. And so they postponed the wedding, which meant that Benita now had to email hundreds of people ASAP who had already bought tickets to their wedding, and most of them would be non-refundable. And also, Benita herself had actually already spent $50,000 on the wedding, on the gowns and the invitations and other stuff, because Paolo would say that he would pay her back. And now she also didn't have a job, so this was a problem. And now also, she would get to most of the people that Paolo would say they were coming, and she managed to get in contact with a sort of spokesperson for the Pope, who said that there was no person called Paolo Macchiarini in his sort of doctor file, so they had no idea. The manager of Andrea Bocelli said that he didn't sing at weddings, and all the other celebrities were also a lie. Next to this, the ring that he had given her as an engagement ring that was $100,000 was actually only $1,000, which to me is a lot of money. I would have sold it for, to be able to pay rent, but Benita, and I kind of get that, she, as a sort of symbolic anger gesture, she threw it in the river. She was like, I'm done. Now, luckily, Benita actually had a boss-ass squad of girlfriends, and two of her best friends were not able to get a refund for their flights to Italy. And so they persuaded Benita to still book a flight to Italy and come with them to enjoy Italy and the places where she was supposed to be. As a fuck you move, still enjoy themselves. And so Benita says, okay. and she books a flight for the 11th of July 2015, so the day that they were going to get married. And exactly at the time when they were supposed to say I do, she toasts herself on the airplane with a glass of champagne, crying. However, she would then land in Italy where her two other friends were. And before they went, they had said, Benita, I know these dresses, you've had to return them and stuff, but that red dress, you have to keep it, and how about you bring it to Italy? And she had done that, and so they went to Castel Gandolfo, and then she put on the red dress that she was supposed to wear for one of the wedding days. And together with her girlfriends, there at Castel Gandolfo as their background, she had a revenge photo shoot, which I thought was just so satisfying. And she said it was obviously very devastating, but it also made her feel powerful to be there and be like, fuck you, I look really hot right now. But this was only the first part of their trip, because Benita still had the address of the house that they were supposed to move into in Barcelona in Spain. She'd never been there, and she kind of felt like this was a bit of a missing link in the story. So she and her friends, they rented a car and they went on a road trip to Barcelona on a sort of quest to find that house that she was supposed to be moving into after that weekend.
We're in Barcelona. We're getting ready to do a little road trip.
Also known as a stakeout.
Now, in the meantime, she was still keeping up appearances with Paolo, and she had said that she had gone to a lake with some friends or something because how postponing the wedding was really emotional and she was very tired. And Paolo said that he was in Russia at the time. So in the car on this road trip, she's still texting him, which I just, I love that. And now when they know they are getting quite close to the house, Benita puts on a blonde wig because she doesn't want to be recognized. And they enter this beautiful valley with hills and beautiful lookout points with mountains. And they stop quite a few times along the way to take photos of themselves with this beautiful background with some, interesting hand gestures. And then they would enter the neighborhood that the house was at, and they parked a bit away at the end of the street to sort of decide what they were going to do now. As in, okay, we've reached the house. Are we going to go up close? Are we going to look around? Are we going to ring the doorbell, see if anyone's there? And just as they are sort of talking about this, getting really excited and hyped up, but also very nervous, they see a person coming out of the back door, walking into the backyard. And it was Paolo. Paolo is not in Russia. Paolo was there, living in that house, because shortly after, a young woman who was not his wife and two young children who were also not his two children that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. These were two young children, and the other children would have been grown-ups by now. They all follow him into the backyard.
I'm in the car, my heart is pounding when I saw him come down the steps with his dog. He's there. You lying sack of. Yeah, I see you. In your white shirt and your black shorts and your gray hair. You. Two little kids coming down the stairs. Wow. My heart is in my chest. I want to puke.
And so they are sitting in the car. Benita sees Paolo there with a younger wife, two children that she doesn't know, and a dog. Which, side note, I do not think he deserves a dog, and I have feelings about that, but... And Benita, who actually was on the verge of going up to the house, when she sees the two little kids, she kind of feels paralyzed because she doesn't want to involve them in any of this. And so her friends come up with the best idea ever, and I love this so much. Benita, she starts filming from inside the car, whilst her friends also filming, but like sort of holding a phone secretly like that. I'm very bad at that, but they were good at it because you can see a little bit. They go up to Paolo's house, and they had brought a bottle of wine in like a nice little gift bag. They ring the doorbell. Paolo opens, and you can see him go, oh my God, what the fuck? What lie have I told you? How can I get you out of here? And they say, oh yeah, no, because we had non-refundable tickets. We were passing through Barcelona and we really wanted to give you our wedding gift that we have brought with us now because we felt so bad about the wedding being postponed. So yeah, here you go, wedding gift. And he just goes, thank you so much. And he doesn't even ask them inside. Like if you have been driving for so long and you especially go visit someone with a gift, you would ask them inside for maybe a glass of water or something. But he's just like, okay, thank you so much, bye. And that was it. They walked back to the car, where now Benita is absolutely besides herself. She, just seeing him there, she loses it. And then they would drive away, and Benita turns around one more time and she sees Paolo go back inside the house. And that was the last time that she would actually ever see him. She did send him one last very long text explaining that she knows everything and that she thinks she's an asshole. And to this, Paolo responded with, wow. Oh, that's so frustrating. Just give an answer. Sorry, that must be some personal frustration of mine, but that's all he had to say. And so obviously Benita was done with it. She cut all ties with him. She dumped all of his stuff. And one of these things that she wanted to get rid of because it had a lot of memories for her was his piano. He had been playing this to learn a song for their wedding. So Benita needed that memory out of there, and she sold it on Craigslist. And to her surprise, she and the woman she sold the piano to would become really good friends, and they would start to hang out a lot and actually go on a trip together at some point. And I'm starting to smile because I think this part is really funny. She went on a trip with this friend, and whilst they are in a car, Benita's driving and the friend's next to her, and they are talking about how crazy it is that they just met on Craigslist selling a piano and now they were here on a holiday together. And this reminded the friend of a thing that she wanted to ask Benita about for quite a while, but she had forgotten to do so every time. And this was that she had figured out that there was a special feature on this piano that Benita hadn't listed in her Craigslist ad. And so she was wondering if Benita didn't know about this feature that the piano had. And this feature was that the piano could play pre-recorded classical piano songs. Benita is like, oh my God. And she immediately goes through all the footage that she has still of Paolo, knowing that she was sure she filmed him at some point when he was playing the piano. And she did. She found a video of him playing the piano. And that was the clip I played you before. But if you look closely, Paolo's not actually playing the piano. He's just sort of brushing the key at some point while the music keeps on playing. Gold. What an idiot are you? He was faking being able to play piano with her. She obviously felt awful because she fell for it, and she's not a stupid person. He was just really good at lying his way through things with his charisma and his knowledge. And I say knowledge because there's more to this. We're not even there yet. Bear with me. Now, meanwhile, the allegations about Paolo and his alleged scientific misconduct, they were reaching headlines, and shit was starting to get pretty intense with this. This made Benita realize that, wait, if he was able to conduct all of these lies and keep this up with me, should he be operating on people? Nah. And so she decided to write an email to the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. And in this email, she explained that Paolo was not the man that he was pretending to be, and that they really should investigate these medical allegations further, because there was probably a point to them. And at the same time, these colleagues who had these allegations against him, they had been operating with him on these transplants, and a few of them during these surgeries had noticed some really weird things that they thought weren't right. But a few of the group would be like, yeah, but Paolo's, he's high up there, so he knows better than we do. But a few of them had gone to the Karolinska Institute and the board and had made official complaints about him and his methods. But so far, the Karolinska Institute hadn't really done anything with it. But now they were investigating. There was also a journalist who was really fascinated by this story when he picked up on it. And he decided he really wanted to investigate further. And what he did is he took all the CVs that Paolo had, and there were actually a few, and he put all the things that Paolo said he had done, all the degrees, all his internships, fellowships, courses he had done, whatnot. He placed all of this together in a spreadsheet, and when he looked at this, he came to a very interesting conclusion, and that was that if Paolo is being truthful, he would have had to be a 10-year-long professor at 4 universities at the same time, and all in a different country. So yeah, they started investigating further and further into this, and it turned out that Paolo, even in the medical field, had lied about almost everything. His master's degree in biostatistics obtained at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, fake. Fellowship in thoracic surgery, fake. Most of the professor positions that he said to have had in Hanover and in Italy, they never actually had him, or they only had him as a sort of adjunct professor who didn't really have a lot of say in what was going on. 6 of the articles that Paolo had published in these prestigious medical journals, like The Lancet, they were all fake. They were filled with lies and falsifications, and so they were retracted. In the meantime, this dude is just traveling the world, sort of, I can't even say operate, sort of experimenting on human bodies. Sorry, that's not funny. It's really effed up. And every time someone kept digging further and further into Paolo, it would start to seem more and more bleak. Because when they started comparing the reports that Paolo had written about these transplant patients that he had had, and by the time it were about 20 of them, they saw that the reports that he had written were very different to the actual charts of the patients themselves in the hospital, and that he lied about their recovery process constantly. When one of his patients started to become much worse after their transplant surgery, Paolo reported that the patient was stable and doing fantastic, whilst in reality, the trachea suffered from severe necrosis, which is just dying tissue, and he also had a collapsed lung. Also, another one of his patients, he reported on them that they were doing well and that they were in recovery, whilst in reality, the patient had actually died. So a lot of the people against Paolo, they put together a 500-page formal complaint about him, accusing him of scientific misconduct. However, when the Karolinska Institute in Sweden concluded their research, the final result was that even though his methods were a bit odd maybe, there was no proof of any scientific misconduct. And so obviously everyone who was involved in exposing this guy went mad. Benita decides that she needs to do something. And so she goes to Vanity Fair and does an interview spilling all of her tea about how he conned her. But also next to that, also really making sure to mention and talk about all the medical things that he was being accused of. And luckily she did that, because this time the story exploded and it had done the trick. In an interview where Paolo responded to these accusations, and this is the interview I was talking about at the beginning, we're almost there, don't worry, the one that reminded me a lot of Amber Heard. In this interview, Paolo would continue to maintain his innocence, saying that all of these people had died from prior complications. But the Karolinska Institute would further their investigation, and in 2016 would issue a statement that they did find him guilty of scientific misconduct, and he was fired in that same year. As a repercussion of all of this, a lot of the board members of the Nobel Prize Selecting Committee and the board members of the institute, the Karolinska Institute, they all either resigned or were fired. So this was a big scandal. All over the world, this was big news, and institutions started questioning their leaders and their methods and their systems, which is a good thing, because a lot of these institutions just let Paolo slip through because they thought he's so important, I must, follow his lead. And this had a lot of impact on these patients that actually had complications they really didn't need to have had. So I want to touch on that for a bit now. Let's talk about his transplant patients, because there were a lot. There were about 20, and there were also a lot of problems. And well, here's what happened to a few of them. Now, the first person that came up was Claudia Castillo, which was before he had the plastic trachea transplant. So this was when he was still doing it with a donor transplant from a deceased person. Now, she was operated on in 2005 on March 3rd, and already a month later, on April 18th, she had to have corrective surgery because she was having recurrent episodes of pneumonitis and she could barely breathe. Now, remember something I said about compassionate use, that when a patient is really known to be dying, that if they agree to it, the patient, they could try new procedures on them, maybe in the hopes that it helps. And Paolo had said to the medical boards that Claudia Castillo was dying from cancer of her esophagus, whilst Claudia neither had cancer nor was she on the verge of death. So, not good. Also, when he first proposed to do the surgery on Claudia, he had said that he and his medical research team in his laboratory had been working on this project for ages, and they had tested it on pigs and that it had worked, whilst in fact there are no documentations to be found anywhere of any of that research. And Claudia had no idea because she just thought she was undergoing this new procedure that he had tested for years. Also, it was discovered that the donor transplant for Claudia's trachea, which had to be, like, her cells had to be cultured on it in a laboratory, this was actually done by a colleague of Paolo in England at his sort of scientific veterinary medical research lab. Which, long story short, basically meant that Claudia's trachea and her cells were being cultivated and treated whilst there were a lot of pig cadavers laying around. And all of this was also done without a specific needed license, which I won't get into. But yeah, when I said that this whole new revolutionary idea was being developed all over the world, some were in London and some were in Italy and then in Barcelona, that was actually not true. That was just sort of in a veterinary lab somewhere in England. And also, there's a big dispute in the hospitals involved, because the hospital in England is saying that they took the donor trachea and the cells were cultivated, and then it was sent off to Barcelona, and then the transplant was transplanted, right? But the university in Barcelona, where the operation was done on Claudia, said that they had not done any further developments on the trachea and that they just received it and transplanted it into the patient upon arrival. So I hope you're still with me, but there's just a big dispute between hospitals. Barcelona is not willing to give out any information on this subject at all. They are keeping mum. And in London, there are a lot of files that can't be recovered as well. So there's a lot of medical cover-ups happening here. And then there was the first person to receive the plastic trachea, because we can't call it any more than that. It's a plastic trachea. And that was under Mariam Byeeeee, the student from Eritrea who was suffering from cancer. Now, this was the operation that had boosted Paolo into stardom for real. But actually, by the end of that year, the implant was failing. And even though Mariam was able to finish his studies and get his degree in 2012, he would die at the beginning of 2013. The autopsy showed that the trachea had completely come loose, which had resulted in a chronic lung infection and a clot in his lung. It has now come to light that Paolo actually had made complaints to the company who had manufactured this plastic trachea, saying that it was faulty. But he still went on with the operation anyway, choosing the best or sort of the least horrible trachea out of the 3 that he had been sent. So what the fuck? Paolo had been reporting on Mariam that his trachea transplant had gone super well and that new tissue had been forming and that a healthy trachea was about to be fully developed. Whilst in fact, Mariam's airway was almost fully closed and he needed a stent tube to keep his airway open to be able to breathe. Also, they did find reports on when Paolo had bathed the plastic trachea in the stem cells, and there was no actual report of the cells actually latching on to the hunk of plastic. So he should have never been allowed to do this surgery, or any surgery now that we know, on living people. And then there was a man named Christopher Lyles who was living in the United States, and he was also suffering from cancer, and his doctors had given up on him. But he had heard of Paolo Macchiarini doing this transplant surgery on Anna Mariam. And he had persuaded his doctors to get in contact with Paolo. And Paolo had said yes. And so Christopher Lyles was flown into Sweden to the Karolinska Institute, where Paolo gave him his artificial plastic trachea. And also Christopher Lyles would die suddenly in 2012, and on him no autopsy was performed. Paolo actually started doing his surgeries on people that were not on the verge of dying, which before he had been sort of able to operate under the term of compassionate use, even though he was lying about that. But now he started doing it as an elective surgery on people that were not in danger at all. He even did a thing where he enabled people to send in a video of themselves explaining why they needed the surgery or why they wanted the surgery, which is almost like a television competition or something, like so not okay. And one of these people sending in a video was Julia Tulik, who was a woman who had been in a car accident, and because of that she had had a tracheostomy. And a tracheostomy, or a trach tube, is basically a hole here with a tube inserted into your trachea or your windpipe, which enables you to breathe. And in her video, she explained that she wanted to be able to sing to her son again. And also she wanted to look, well, not wearing a tube in your throat, I suppose. And so Paolo selected her and he operated on her, giving her the plastic trachea in June of 2012. Now, actually immediately after her surgery, Julia would go on to have complications, and she went home with a lot of trouble breathing. She would go on to live in horrible pain for the next 2 years, and her mother would say that she smelled like rotting flesh all the time. Her plastic trachea would later collapse and she would die in 2014. Now, the smell of rotting flesh would come from a phenomenon called necrosis, which basically means that the cells weren't latching on, the blood vessels weren't latching on to the hunk of plastic. The opposite, actually. Everything and the tissue around it was just dying. So she was smelling rotting flesh. And meanwhile, Paolo was just blabbing on in these prestigious medical journals about how great everything went, which was just an outright lie. Now, one of his most disputed cases is that of a 24-year-old Turkish woman named Yaseem Satir. And Yaseem had come in with complications from a very routine operation that was done because she had excessive sweating in her hands. Something had gone wrong, I'm not sure why, but she had a nicked trachea. And so obviously Paolo strided in to help her, and he performed his surgery with the plastic trachea on her in 2012. Yaseem actually would need 191 operations to fix what Paolo had done. She actually had so many complications that she would continue to live a life of suffering, being in constant need of her airway cleared, not being able to breathe, constantly having seizures as well. Her kidneys were failing and she was just said to be in constant suffering. After years and years of this horrible situation, in 2017, also Yaseem Satir would pass away. And she only came to the hospital at some point because she had excessive sweating in her hands. And then there was Hannah Warren, which was the Korean toddler who had operated on in 2013. And also when he had met Benita filming this documentary. Now, Hannah had been born without a trachea and her doctors had given up on her, but obviously there again was Paolo striding in to help with his plastic toilet roll tube. And sadly, also Hannah Warren would pass away on the 6th of July 2013. Actually, the single surviving patient out of the 20-ish people he operated on would be a young Irish boy called Kieran Finn Lynch. But Kieran had his transplant removed when it caused problems and then had another trachea transplant with a donor. And from what I could find, Kieran nowadays is still alive, but out of all of the other people, he's the only one. Also, another case worth mentioning is a case that wasn't done by Paolo, but by one of his sort of accomplices, and this colleague of his operated on a 15-year-old girl named Shauna Davison. Now, Shauna had only been born with one lung, a heart defect, and a sort of chronic respiratory arrest. And for this, she was given a donor transplant trachea with her stem cells, and unfortunately also quickly ended up deteriorating and passing away. And her mum has actually come out on television in an interview and said that she had no idea that these people had died from it before, because they were just being told it was just not a routine procedure, but it was just an operation. There's people who either were gonna die but maybe could have lived longer and in less pain and suffering, and there's people who weren't gonna die at all but who did because they were operated on by Paolo. The one thing we now do know is that when he was doing his research on the plastic trachea at the Karolinska Institute, that he falsified the outcome of that because his rats had all miserably died. Actually, the procedure that was performed on this 15-year-old girl, Shauna Davison, they would later find out that the studies that were done on this procedure were just done on several animals. I don't want to get into that too much, but all of the animals had died and the study was stopped on humane grounds. How did this go on to be performed on a 15-year-old girl? For those of you that don't know, I dog sit for a friend 5 days a week, and she returned home, so I had to stop filming. But let's continue, because we still need to do the interview. And there's also another person that I feel like we need to talk about, and that is Paloma Cabeza, or Cabeza, I'm not sure. And she is a patient from Spain who was supposed to be the second trachea transplant, not the plastic one, but the donor one, after Claudia Castillo. And she actually met Claudia Castillo in the hospital. They became friends, and Claudia called Paloma at some point to say, okay, I can't tell anyone this, but I trust you and I don't think you should have the transplant, because my success story that has been portrayed like this phenomenal thing in the media is actually not true. It's all false. And so Paloma decided not to do it because she already had a feeling that something wasn't right, and she went through her medical records, and she was one of the patients, as she found out, that Paolo had said had cancer, but she actually didn't. And he has also done some laser sort of therapy on her that actually hurt her more, and that was exactly the spot that needed to be hurt for him to be able to get the consent from the board of the hospitals, so that it would still fall on the compassionate use and that he would be allowed to do his trachea transplant on her. And he's actually threatened her, saying, I will make sure that you will never find a good doctor ever again in your life. And nowadays, Paloma is still alive, but obviously she didn't have the transplant, but she has so many physical complications from the things that Paolo has done to her. And she has been battling with severe depression and suicidal thoughts. So, all right, now let's get to the interview that reminded me so much of Amber Heard's interview on NBC. And this is an interview with Paolo from 2017, which he did with a Swedish broadcasting network. And the interviewer is Leonard Hugman Boy. I think that's how you pronounce it. He's a legend, because Samantha Guthrie did a good job. But this interviewer actually asked the questions that I wanted him to ask. But the way Paolo responds, I'm going to try to show you as much of the interview as possible, but I'm not sure how copyright-wise that's going to work. But I'm going to try, because the way Paolo responds is just... Okay, right. Wait. I'm not a professional. As you know, I've just been watching 6 solid weeks of Emily D. Baker because of a certain trial that was going on. And also the behavioural arts was doing stuff on it, which is like body language. So yeah, I'm not a professional, but form your own opinions, all that stuff. All right, so let's get into it. So this interview was the first time that the Karolinska Institute had investigated Paolo, but then sort of cleared him like, nah, we think it's fine. And then after that, Benita went to Vanity Fair and everything exploded. Hope you're with me. But at the moment of this interview, Paolo he had just been cleared of all charges, right? And he just acts like he hasn't done anything wrong, like he knows better than anyone else. He is sort of mansplaining his way through the entire interview, almost never answers the question. And when the interviewer asks him about, do you feel any regret? Do you feel sorry? And he just starts talking about himself. The only second he starts like apologizing to the families of the deceased people, and the interviewer just goes, okay, but what are you apologizing for? Great question. And Paolo starts talking about how hard it must have been for the families that now have to go through all this media scrutiny, which like he's basically saying that the media is worse than what he did to them.
But here in Sweden, you as the responsible surgeon should have taken care of those permissions, and you didn't.
I'm
Do you
sorry.
see this as a critique?
Yes, I'm afraid that I must agree.
But this is still the doctor's responsibility
What do you mean with this?
with the permits.
My only responsibility is to follow the rules that I have from my supervisors and from my bosses.
No, it's not. That's not your only responsibility. You're a surgeon, not someone working in an office.
Regarding the surgeries, the patients' deaths, and the time they had before they died, do you have any regrets today?
Would you a little bit more extrapolate the question, because it's really vague?
There has been multiple reports saying that they were not in immediate danger of death and that their suffering may have been prolonged.
Well, actually, the only report that I must take into account is the police report.
Others disagree and say that they could have lived longer and in less pain.
Right. I'm open to every critique, of course, and accept critiques if they are constructive.
But you don't
Then-
think that you did
I didn't
anything
say-
central wrong?
Right. I didn't say that yet.
I didn't say I didn't do anything wrong yet.
But there
The
has been
patient-
some serious and very deep investigations into this, and they disagree with that description.
Well, which one is this? Because there are so many investigations, and
It's
I never saw that.
okay. But you
Which
say that
is-
the only
which-
report that really matters is
which
the police
is-
report.
Which
And
is not something that I say, but is,
yeah, but this is what doctors have done in this report.
of course.
This is a medical investigation.
Of course, that means that the multidisciplinary teams that have evaluated, and on different times scales, that means in a more dynamic fashion.
But
And
do you really think that everyone else is wrong? Because I think that almost everyone who has looked into this comes to the conclusion that what you are saying is not correct or not the whole truth. Do you
Maybe-
really think that everyone else is wrong
No, I just believe the police is right.
and everyone else wrong?
I didn't say that. Of course, we were going to an unknown because nobody else had did this type of transplantation before. But
And that's
from a-
why the investigations say that you shouldn't have done them.
Possibly that's true, but then what do we should have offered to this patient? Nothing?
That's what the evaluations have said.
Well, evaluation evaluates records. I can only trust the people. And to
But
me,
you-
it was
Aren't you supposed to follow the regulations and not just trust people?
Professor Sefelian was responsible at the UCL.
And he has now
And-
been fired.
Well, this is a problem that I cannot comment.
Where would you have stopped by yourself if you hadn't been stopped by other people?
What do you mean with this? Sorry.
There were several patients who
Yes.
died, and you
In
still
which,
you
in,
still-
which, in which frame? Because we are talking about a frame of 12 months. And to me, the postoperative
But there was
course-
evidence of collapsed tracheas, and you still continued.
The
The
course-
first patient had a collapsed trachea as well at the autopsy.
Well, I'm very surprised that you know the results of the autopsy.
Yeah, I bet you are.
And of course, I will not comment on the autopsy because of the confidentiality of the medical records.
Do you have any regrets regarding the 3 patients in Sweden?
I have, of course, a deep sadness in how the media has depicted or portrayed me.
What?
But, I'm very sorry. I apologize deeply with the families. And I
What
must
are you
apologize.
apologizing for?
And I must apologize as well for the fact that Swedish television has, well, you must understand, it's not
it's very bad that you lose a relative. But even worse if a journalist
So you think that the documentary hurt them more than your surgery?
Claiming that the death of their beloved were caused by wrongdoings of doctors.
What's your daily life like today?
Today I'm here. Tomorrow I'm flying to another city in Europe to do a surgery, and on Monday to another continent to do a surgery again.
But do you feel this confident about this? Because what you're saying is that dozens, if not hundreds of people are wrong.
No,
I'm not. You are right.
Maybe my English was bad. Now, if the media wants to be investigative, as you are, and not just lying and using my case simply because I was famous to make rates or TV rates.
No, the media is reporting on what you did, asshole. But I find the mental health aspect of this really fascinating because, like, obviously there's some sort of personality disorder going on, not wanting to accept any other reality than his own. And I'm not professional, so I don't know if it's histrionic or narcissistic or cuntic, I don't know. But I do find that fascinating because obviously he also still operates because of the way how his brain works, if you get what I mean. So yeah, I find brains very fascinating if you're new here. So the trial, right? He first was fired in 2016 from the Karolinska Institute, but he happily skippity-hopped on to another job at the Kazan Federal University in Russia. However, he was also fired from there a year later because they realized he didn't even have a license to operate in Russia. So he was fired from Russia. Russia fired him. And also in 2018, he published even a new medical article. The publisher of this article said that, yo, we did some really thoroughly, we thoroughly reviewed the whole thing. How did you not know that everything that the Lancet had published, that everything was retracted? How did you not know? But however, the trial actually started due to COVID and stuff only this year in April and only ended exactly a month ago today. And yes, I've been very on it. The sentence was that they did find him guilty of medical misconduct. However, that it wasn't with intentional malice. So he got a 2-year probation sentence, meaning that he's not going to jail even. He's free to operate. He just can't do shitty operations anymore. How is this guy still operating? I'm just baffled. I actually did sit through the entire trial, by the way. Well, not the entire trial, but it's online, but it was in Swedish. So half of it was just me waiting for the Swedish translation, which has gotten me into a new hyperfocus. So I'm now learning Swedish on Duolingo. Jag är en kvinna och dricker vatten. I don't actually know how to do the explosion sound, so I think that was just awkward, that sunglass movement. Anyway, that'll be all for today. If you're still watching, that actually means a lot. So thank you for that. And if this was your first time here, I hope you had fun. I did. And there's much more where this came from on the rest of my channel. So feel free to go on a binge if you know you're up for it. And then one could also possibly subscribe, but we don't do mandatory things here. So I think I made you do it before, didn't I? So please go give yourself a big kiss in the mirror from me. I mean now, do it now. And also tell the ones you love that you love them. All right, I'll see you next week. Bye. Wait, what do I not mean? Continue to regenerative was regenerative. And so in 2013, titled Life on the Line. Is that true? No, leap of faith. What? In an interview,